Listen carefully to what's happening inside you right now. That voice commenting on everything you do, warning you, criticizing you, replaying moments from the past, predicting outcomes before they happen. It feels intimate, familiar, almost inseparable from who you are. But here's the truth most people never stop to consider. That voice is not your identity. It is not your essence. It is not even original. It is a pattern that was built inside you, layer by layer, long before you had the awareness to question it. From the moment you were young, your mind began absorbing signals, words spoken by parents, teachers, authority figures, reactions from society, praise, shame, fear, expectations. Each experience left a mark, and slowly those marks formed an internal narrator. That narrator learned how to keep you safe, how to avoid pain, how to fit in, and at first it was useful. It helped you survive emotionally. But survival is not the same as living. Over time, what once protected you began to limit you. The most dangerous part is that this voice uses your own language. It speaks in your tone. It says I instead of it. And because of that, you never question it. When it says I'm not good enough, you don't hear it as a learned belief, you hear it as a fact. When it says this will never work, you treat it like wisdom. You don't realize that you're listening to a recycled script, not a conscious truth. Think about how automatic it is. You don't choose most of your thoughts. They appear. One leads to another. A memory triggers an emotion. An emotion triggers a conclusion. And before you know it, your entire mood has shifted without a single deliberate decision from you. That alone should tell you something important. If you didn't choose the thought, how can it define who you are? Yet most people live their entire lives believing that voice is themselves. They defend it. They obey it. They organize their future around it. And slowly, almost invisibly, their world shrinks. They stop trying things not because they failed, but because a thought predicted failure. They stop speaking honestly not because it's dangerous, but because a thought warned them. They stop becoming who they could be, not because of reality, but because of a mental habit. Here's the deeper truth. That voice was shaped by a version of you that was smaller, younger, and less aware. It learned from moments when you didn't have power. It learned from fear, not from wisdom. And yet you're allowing it to run your adult life. You're letting a past conditioned pattern make present decisions. Notice how repetitive it is. It doesn't create new insights. It repeats the same concerns in different forms. It loops. That's not intelligence, that's conditioning. Real intelligence is responsive, alive, flexible. This voice is predictable, and predictability is the signature of habit, not truth. Once you see this clearly, something shifts. You start to notice the gap between you and the voice. You hear a thought arise, and instead of saying, "This is me," you begin to say, "This is something happening in me." That small distinction changes everything. Because the moment you stop identifying with it, it loses authority. You don't need to fight the voice. Fighting strengthens it. You don't need to silence it. Silence comes naturally when attention changes. All you need is recognition. Recognition that this voice is a product of conditioning, not your core. It can speak, but it does not command. It can comment, but it does not decide. And when that realization settles in, even briefly, you feel it. A subtle spaciousness, a sense of relief. As if something heavy you've been carrying was never yours to begin with. That space is not empty, it's alive. It's awareness. And from that place, choice becomes possible again. Because you are not the voice in your head. You are the one who hears it. Once you begin to see that the voice in your head is not you, another unsettling realization follows naturally. If that voice is not you, then who has been living your life all this time? Most people assume they are awake because they think, decide, plan, and react. But what if much of that activity is mechanical? What if instead of living consciously, you have been moving through patterns, habits of thought, emotion, and reaction that run on their own, like a machine that was switched on long ago? Observe your daily life closely. How often do you truly choose your responses? A situation appears, and before you are even aware of it, an emotion rises. That emotion brings a familiar thought. The thought leads to a predictable action. This chain happens so quickly that it feels intentional, but it is not. It is automatic. You are not responding to life as it is. You are responding to an inner program built from past experiences. This is why people repeat the same mistakes while swearing they want change. The conscious desire says, "I want something different." But the unconscious pattern says, "I know this territory. It feels familiar." and the unconscious almost always wins. Familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar freedom. So the same relationships repeat with different faces. The same fears appear in new situations. The same self-sabotage wears different disguises. The voice in your head is the spokesperson of this unconscious machinery. It doesn't ask what is true now. It asks what kept you safe before. It doesn't care about growth. It cares about predictability. That is why it resists change so fiercely. Every time you stand at the edge of something new, it floods you with doubt, hesitation, and imagined disaster. Not because the danger is real, but because the unknown threatens its controls. And here is the uncomfortable part. As long as you remain unaware of this process, you will defend it. You will call it your personality. You will say, "That's just how I am." You will confuse habit with identity. But personality, as most people live it, is nothing more than a collection of unconscious reactions pretending to be a self. Awareness is the beginning of liberation, but it is also deeply disturbing. The moment you start observing yourself honestly, you realize how little of your inner life is actually conscious. Thoughts arise without invitation. Emotions surge without permission. Judgments appear before understanding. This realization can feel destabilizing, even frightening. If you are not the thinker of your thoughts, then what are you? But this question is not meant to scare you. It is meant to wake you up. Because the one who can notice these patterns, the one who can watch the thought, feel the emotion, and sense the impulse without being swallowed by them, that one is not mechanical. That one is conscious. And consciousness is not loud. It does not argue. It does not rush. It simply sees. When you begin to live from this seeing, something remarkable happens. The patterns do not vanish overnight, but they loosen. They no longer grip you with the same force. A thought arises, and instead of immediately believing it, you pause. An emotion appears, and instead of acting it out, you hold it in awareness. In that pause, a new possibility emerges: choice. This is what most people have been missing their entire lives. Not motivation, not discipline, not positive thinking. Choice, real. Choice can only exist when you are no longer possessed by unconscious patterns. Without awareness, you are pushed. With awareness, you can step aside. This is also why true change feels uncomfortable at first. Awareness disrupts the familiar inner order. It challenges the old internal authorities. It reveals that much of what you believed about yourself was inherited, absorbed, or imposed, not discovered. And the ego, which thrives on certainty, resists this exposure. It would rather stay asleep than face the uncertainty of becoming conscious. But there is no genuine growth without this discomfort. To become whole, you must be willing to see what has been running you. Not to judge it, not to destroy it, but to bring it into the light. What is seen clearly no longer controls blindly. And as this awareness deepens, life begins to feel different. Not necessarily easier, but more real. You stop living as a bundle of reactions and start living as a witnessing presence. You respond instead of react. You act instead of repeat. And slowly, quietly, you reclaim authorship over your own existence, because the moment you see the machinery, you are no longer trapped inside it. As awareness grows and you stop mistaking the voice in your head for who you are, a deeper confrontation begins. You start to notice that this inner voice does not only lie to you, it divides you. It splits your inner world into parts that fight each other. One part wants safety, another wants meaning. One part wants approval, another wants freedom. And most people live their entire lives caught in this inner civil war, exhausted without knowing why. You feel it when you hesitate even after making a decision. You feel it when you move forward while secretly pulling yourself back. You feel it when success feels strangely empty, or when failure feels familiar. These are not random feelings. They are signals of fragmentation inside the psyche. Different inner forces are pulling in opposite directions, each claiming to be you. The voice in your head is very skilled at hiding this conflict. It creates justifications. It tells stories. It blames circumstances, people, fate. But underneath the explanations lies a simple truth. Parts of you have been ignored, suppressed, or denied, and they have not disappeared. They have gone underground. And what is buried alive does not rest, it interferes. This is why people sabotage themselves at the edge of breakthroughs. This is why they repeat behaviors they swear they hate. The rejected parts of the psyche do not want your happiness. They want recognition. They want to be seen, acknowledged, and integrated. And when they are not, they act out through anxiety, procrastination, addiction, or destructive relationships. Most people are taught to fight these inner parts, to silence fear, to overcome weakness, to kill doubt. But this only deepens the division. What you resist internally does not vanish. It becomes more cunning. It waits for moments of stress, fatigue, or vulnerability, and then it takes control. That is why willpower alone never works for long. The real work is not suppression. It is confrontation with compassion. It is the courage to turn inward and ask, what part of me is speaking right now? Not to obey it and not to reject it, but to understand it. Because every inner voice, even the destructive one, carries a message about unmet needs, old wounds, or forgotten truths. When you begin this inner dialogue, something shifts. The voice loses its absolute authority. It is no longer a dictator. It becomes a character, and characters can be understood. They can be negotiated with. They can be integrated into a larger whole. This is the beginning of inner unity. Not perfection, but wholeness. You stop trying to become someone else and start becoming more of what you already are. You recognize that strength without vulnerability becomes cruelty, and vulnerability without strength becomes helplessness. Wholeness requires both. As this integration unfolds, you notice a strange calm emerging beneath the noise. The thoughts still come, the emotions still rise, but they no longer define the entire sky of your inner world. They are weather, not the climate. And the one who observes this weather, quiet, steady, attentive, that is the center you have been missing. From this center, life becomes less reactive. You no longer need to constantly defend an image of yourself. You can admit uncertainty without collapsing. You can face fear without running. You can hold conflicting feelings without being torn apart by them. This is not emotional numbness. It is emotional maturity. And here is the paradox. The more you integrate your inner divisions, the more human you become. You stop pretending to be fearless, flawless, or always in control. You become real. And reality has weight, depth, and presence. People sense it. Life responds to it. This is also where responsibility truly begins. Not the kind that comes from guilt or obligation, but the kind that comes from awareness. You stop blaming the voice, the past, or the world. You see the patterns clearly, and in seeing them, you take ownership of your inner life. Not because you caused everything, but because you are the one who can transform it. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the silent enemy inside your head loses its power. Not because you defeated it, but because you understood it. And what is understood can no longer rule from the shadows. Because the moment you bring light to the divided parts within you, you stop being controlled by them. And you begin to live as a whole human being once. You begin to see that the voice in your head is not you. A deeper and more uncomfortable realization appears. Much of what you call your personality is actually a collection of habits, formed to survive the past. This is where people become confused. They think awareness should instantly free them. Yet instead they feel exposed, uncertain, even lost. And that is because when the false center begins to dissolve, the old structures that once held you together start to weaken. For years you built your identity around reactions, how you learned to stay quiet to avoid conflict, how you learned to be clever to gain approval, how you learned to be strong because weakness was not safe. These strategies worked once. They protected you, but the mind never updates itself automatically. It keeps using old solutions for new problems, and slowly those survival patterns turn into a cage. This is why intelligent people often feel stuck in ways they cannot explain. They understand ideas deeply, yet their lives do not move. Because insight alone does not undo conditioning. Awareness shows you the bars of the prison, but habit keeps you inside it. And the voice in your head is very clever here. It tells you, this is just who you are. But that statement is one of its greatest lies. You are not your patterns. You are the awareness that notices them. When this becomes clear, another challenge arises. The mind resists change not because change is wrong, but because the unknown feels dangerous. The voice begins to whisper subtle fears. If you let go of this identity, who will you be? If you stop striving, will you become nothing? If you stop controlling, will everything fall apart? These fears are not logical, but they are powerful. Because they come from the deepest layers of the psyche, most people respond by retreating. They return to familiar suffering because it feels safer than unfamiliar freedom. But growth has never been comfortable. Growth is a kind of inner death. Something false must fall apart for something real to emerge. And the mind, whose job is to preserve continuity, will always resist this process. Here is the crucial shift. Instead of trying to silence the voice, you learn to listen without obedience. You stop arguing with it. You stop believing it. You allow it to speak while you remain rooted in awareness. This changes the entire inner dynamic. The voice loses urgency. It no longer feels like an emergency broadcast. It becomes background noise. At first, this feels strange. You may feel less motivated, less driven, but what is actually happening is that compulsive motivation is being replaced by conscious choice. You are no longer pushed by fear. You are pulled by meaning, and meaning moves more slowly, but it lasts. As this transition continues, you start noticing how often your thoughts were never about truth, but about control. Controlling outcomes, controlling how others see you, controlling your own emotions. The mind does not seek peace. It seeks certainty. And certainty is a poor substitute for wisdom. Wisdom emerges when you allow life to be uncertain without collapsing into anxiety, when you can sit with discomfort without needing immediate resolution, when you can admit "I don't know" and remain present anyway. This is where maturity lives, not in answers, but in the capacity to hold questions. And something remarkable happens here. As you stop identifying with the voice, you also stop taking yourself so personally. Failures lose their sting. Success loses its intoxication. You begin to act from a deeper place, not to prove your worth, but to express what is alive within you. This is authenticity. Not performance, not rebellion, but alignment. You also begin to see others differently. When you recognize that your own mind has been lying to you, you stop expecting others to be free from their illusions. Compassion naturally grows. Not pity, but understanding. You see how much of human behavior is driven by unconscious fear and unmet needs, and this understanding frees you from constant judgment. This does not make you passive. On the contrary, it makes your actions cleaner. When you speak, there is less defensiveness. When you decide, there is less inner resistance. When you move forward, there is less self-sabotage. Because your energy is no longer divided against itself. At this stage, silence becomes important. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of inner commentary. Moments where you are simply present, walking, breathing, listening without narrating the experience. In these moments, you taste what life feels like without psychological distortion. Simple, direct, real. This is the foundation of inner freedom, not the elimination of thought, but the end of identification with it. Thoughts continue to arise, but they no longer sit on the throne. Awareness does. And from this place, you no longer ask, "How do I control my mind?" You ask a better question: who is aware of the mind? Because the answer to that question is not a thought, it is an experience. And once you experience it, even briefly, you know with certainty that you are more than the voice in your head, and that knowing changes everything. Awareness deepens. You begin to notice something unsettling yet liberating. Even when the voice in your head quiets, there is still a pull toward old choices. This is where many people misunderstand freedom. They believe that once they see the illusion, they should instantly live differently. But the psyche does not transform in a single moment of insight. It reshapes itself through repeated recognition. This is the stage where intelligent minds often relapse, not because they are weak, but because they underestimate the depth of their conditioning. For years, your mind has rehearsed certain emotional responses. Fear appears before opportunity. Doubt rises before action. Self-criticism follows even small mistakes. These patterns are not random. They were learned. They formed when you needed them, often long before you had the power to choose differently. And now, even when you no longer believe the voice, the body still reacts as if the old story were true. This creates an inner split. One part of you sees clearly, another part still behaves automatically, and this gap can feel frustrating. You may ask yourself, if I understand all this, why do I still hesitate? Why do I still feel stuck? But this question itself reveals the final trap. The expectation that understanding alone should heal what was built over time. Real change happens when awareness meets patience. You are not here to fight your old patterns. You are here to outgrow them. Every time a familiar fear arises and you notice it without acting it out, something subtle shifts. The mind learns a new lesson. I can feel this and still move forward. This is how the nervous system rewires itself, not through force, but through experience. And this is where intelligent people often struggle most. They want a clean solution, a method, a framework, something they can master. But inner freedom does not submit to control. It unfolds through relationship. A relationship with your thoughts, your emotions, your history. When you try to dominate this process, you strengthen the very ego that keeps you trapped. Instead, You are asked to stay present during the uncomfortable moments. When the urge to retreat appears, you remain. When uncertainty feels heavy, you do not rush to escape it. When the voice says, "This will fail," you let the thought pass without argument or obedience. This quiet endurance is not weakness. It is psychological courage. Gradually, a new center of gravity forms within you. You begin to act not because fear has disappeared, but because fear no longer decides. Your choices start aligning with something deeper than comfort, something closer to truth. And truth, unlike the mind's stories, does not need constant defense. At this stage, many people experience a strange calm mixed with vulnerability. The old armor is gone, but the new strength has not fully formed yet. This is a delicate phase. It is easy to fall back into old identities just to feel solid again. But if you stay with the uncertainty, you discover something profound. Your sense of self does not need constant reinforcement. It exists even when you do nothing to protect it. This realization changes how you relate to life. You stop chasing outcomes as proof of worth. You stop measuring your value through comparison. You begin to live more from response than reaction. Life becomes a dialogue rather than a battlefield. And perhaps the most important shift happens quietly. You start trusting your own experience more than your thoughts about it. You listen inwardly, not to the noise of anxiety, but to the subtle intelligence beneath it. This intelligence does not shout. It does not argue. It simply knows when something is aligned and when it is not. From here, action becomes simpler, not easier but clearer. You move when it is time to move. You pause when it is time to pause. You no longer need to justify every decision to the voice in your head. The inner committee dissolves and a single direction emerges. This is not perfection. You will still stumble. Old patterns will still visit. But they no longer define you. They pass through you like weather, while something deeper remains untouched. And when you look back, you realize that what once felt like being stuck was actually a slow awakening, an invitation to step out of the mental prison, not by breaking its walls, but by realizing you were never confined in the first place. And finally, there comes a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable, when you realize that nothing dramatic needs to happen anymore. No final breakthrough, no sudden transformation, no heroic version of yourself waiting to arrive. This is where the deepest freedom begins. And it often feels underwhelming to the mind that has been addicted to struggle. For years, your inner world was shaped by conflict. You versus your thoughts. You versus your past. You versus who you think you should be. Even growth became another battlefield. But now something softens. You begin to sense that life does not require constant correction. It requires presence. You simply allow them to pass, like background noise in a room where your attention is focused elsewhere, and that elsewhere is life itself. You become more attuned to simple realities, the tone of a conversation, the weight of a decision, the feeling in your body when something is true or false for you. This is not mysticism. It is psychological maturity, the kind that does not announce itself but quietly reshapes how you live. This is also where responsibility takes on a new meaning. Not the heavy, guilt-driven responsibility you were taught, but a natural sense of authorship. You no longer blame your past for your present, nor do you shame yourself for what you didn't know before. You see your life as something you are participating in, moment by moment, and that participation feels honest. From here, change becomes organic. You don't force habits. They evolve. You don't chase confidence. It grows through alignment. You don't need motivation speeches every day, because your energy is no longer leaking into internal conflict. There is a quiet efficiency to your actions now. You speak more simply. You listen more deeply. You choose more carefully, not out of fear of mistakes, but out of respect for your inner state. You begin to sense when something costs you too much internally, even if it looks impressive externally. And for the first time, you honor that knowing. This is where many people could go further, but don't, because this level of inner autonomy can feel lonely at first. You may notice that fewer people resonate with you. Old conversations feel shallow. Old ambitions feel hollow. This is not superiority. It is transition. And if you mistake it for isolation, you might retreat back into familiar noise. But if you stay, something stabilizes. You discover that being alone with yourself is no longer threatening. Silence becomes spacious instead of oppressive. And in that silence, creativity returns. Not the frantic creativity of proving yourself, but the natural expression of something alive within you. You don't need to announce your growth. It shows in how you handle pressure, in how you disagree without hostility, in how you walk away without resentment, in how you remain steady when others are reactive. This is the kind of strength that cannot be faked, because it does not need validation. And then one day, perhaps while facing a challenge that once would have paralyzed you, you notice it clearly. The voice in your head is still there, but it no longer runs your life. You are thinking, but you are not trapped in thought. You are feeling, but you are not overwhelmed by feeling. You are acting, but you are not driven by compulsion. There is a center within you that remains intact through success and failure alike. That is when you understand the truth that was hidden all along. Freedom was never about controlling your mind. It was about no longer mistaking it for who you are.